What's going on, everybody? It's your boy JRich. Week 11 in the NFL is here, and here is your best place to take an early look at some lines over on Prizepicks. I'm going to be identifying and talking about a few different plays that I do really like on the slate for this weekend. As always, make sure that you do shop these lines to make sure they're still available or you're getting them at similar value as to when I posted this. I am recording this Saturday morning. So if you're seeing this a little bit later in the day, there may be some line movement and you will be able to see some things on my sheet as well that we'll be able to look at later on Sunday or just before the games kick off Sunday afternoon. So let's dive into this slate because I've already identified a bunch of plays that I do really like and things we should be monitoring going forward. So without further ado, let's get into the props for this weekend. So as you can see here, a ton of different plays that I've already identified that I really like, and you can see some of the value towards some of these plays as well and why I may be really liking these plays. Right off the top, you have K-Dot and Tyler Higbee under their receiving yards, minus 140 for K-Dot and minus 135 for Higbee. Both are tremendous values. When you look at Higbee, he's only hit 28.5 yards in one of his last 5 games. Ever since Cooper Kupp came back, he's been virtually irrelevant. Now, he did hit this number against the Seahawks when he played them last time, just barely, but I do think that this game will be predicated on the running game. They ran the ball 40 times against Seattle the first time around. They're playing in LA, in the Dome, in a good environment. I just don't think Higbee's going to be very involved. He hasn't been lately, and I don't expect that to change much. Obviously, the Rams have been struggling. They're going to try to get the ball to Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, and they're going to run the heck out of the ball because they've had a ton of success and Seattle has been god-awful against running backs lately. So I think this is a great spot to take an under for Higbee, especially with the value you're getting on the Prizepicks board right now. I think it's a great spot for an under, so give me the under for Tyler Higbee. And it's the same story with K-Dot. K-Dot hasn't seen a ton of success. Now you go back and say, well, what about that game against Houston? Well, against Houston, who is the worst defense in the NFL at defending tight ends, yes, it was a great spot. I believe he had 6 receptions for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns. But then he comes back the next week and does virtually nothing yet again. This week they have San Francisco, so there is opportunities for late game garbage time, receptions, yards, points, etc. But if you're just taking the play on face value, yes, San Francisco are heavy favorites. But if this game is even close a little bit, he's one of the guys who's going to get targets, but very few, if any at all. And that's just the reality of K-Dot. And he's the number 1 tight end on the team, but he doesn't see a lot of volume. It's going to go to Rachaad White, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and even Trey Palmer to some extent before they will go to K-Dot. The matchup isn't great either. San Francisco's in the top 10 in terms of defending tight ends. So it's just not a very good spot right now to take an over for any of those tight ends. But a tight end I do love on the board this week is Trey McBride. He's facing off against the Houston Texans. And as I mentioned, the Houston Texans are allowing 79 receiving yards per game to opposing tight ends. His line is 55.5. Trey McBride has been on fire. He was on fire even before Kyler Murray came back and had a phenomenal week last week. Now he has the best matchup in the NFL for tight ends. Give me the over for Trey McBride's receiving yards. I think 55.5 is more than reasonable. I think it only continues to climb throughout the week. And I think it's a great spot. It's already minus 130 towards the over. So take the over for Trey McBride. Another play I do really like that I was looking up before I hopped on and started recording was this Sam Howell play. Sam Howell for his rushing yards. And I can just pull up the game log now. Let me see if we can see this. I'm a little bit in the way here. But if you look here at this rushing yards column, you can kind of see that over the past 5 games, 17, 27, 11, 15. I know it's a little small. You can't really see it, but the line's only 12.5. And then you look towards this Giants game when he played them last time, he had 15 rushing yards. So I do really like this number. As you can see, it's already minus 130 towards the over. This Giants defense isn't good. Like, it's a bad defense. And for whatever reason, they did have success against Sam Howell last time, but this is a mark that he did hit. He did go over on the rushing yards. So I do really like that line for Sam Howell. I'd be willing to take the rushing yards at 12.5. If it gets up to, 14.5, I'd say I'm not so sure. But I think the Giants, for whatever reason, kind of have figured out Sam Howell and kind of had his number in that first matchup. They are favored by a lot. I don't necessarily believe they're going to cover, even though they do have Tommy DeVito on the other side. I just think the Giants have played Sam Howell well, and they played him well the first game. I don't know if that's going to be much better this time around, and I think he will have to run a little bit to find success in this game. Another player I absolutely love is Christian Kirk. Pretty much the only reliable option that Trevor Lawrence has right now. For whatever reason, they haven't been able to get the ball to Calvin Ridley. They have been okay getting the ball to Evan Ingram, but Trevor Lawrence has really struggled. He hasn't been playing overly well. He needs to play better, but the only guy he can trust every single week has been Christian Kirk. I believe it was last week I was talking about this, how that split between him and Ridley is basically gone now. Christian Kirk is the guy. He's probably going to be the guy. And at 58.5 receiving yards against Tennessee is a more than beatable defense against wide receivers, especially from the slot. They're getting a little bit better outside, but in the slot, they definitely is where they struggled. We know that Trevor's going to get the ball to Christian Kirk because that's just his guy right now. It's the guy he trusts, the guy he throws the ball to the most. So really love the value on Christian Kirk. And if you wanted to go for Devontae Smith as well, in what we hope is going to be a big game shootout in Kansas City this weekend, or on Monday night, actually, I don't mind the over at 55.5 as well. I think it's a good spot. The rushing yards for Austin Eckler looks pretty good against Green Bay. They aren't the best against running backs, and there could be value there. Jared Goff's rushing yards as well look pretty good, and I was looking at that one. You see this Tank Dell line at 4.5 receptions? Do not take that. Like, do not take the under there. If anything, we're taking the over. Nico Collins is back. Noah Brown, we're going to see if he is back, but he could potentially miss that game, at which point you have to take an over on Tank Dell. So if you're seeing this 4.5 line and liking the under, definitely do not go that route. Wait for more information and kind of see what happens. But we expect that line to move a little bit in our favor and work more towards even, or even potentially to an over. Bryce Young's rushing yards, another one here that looks pretty good. Minus 130 towards the over at 10.5. I don't know what Bryce is doing right now in terms of his rushing production. Maybe we could just look it up really quickly. I don't think he's doing much of anything. And against this Cowboys defense, I mean, he's probably going to have to run in these matchups if he wants to stay competitive. So you see here, when you look at the rushing, you can't really see it. I can move myself out of the way here, but 18, 41, 11. Yeah, I mean, it's past 3 games, he's been having to run a little bit, which is good. You know, Chicago, he ran. I mean, against Indy, he ran a lot. Yeah, I mean, it's a decent line. I don't hate it, and especially up against this Cowboys team, 10.5, not a bad spot at all. And when you're talking about Bryce Young, it's just, what's he going to do? That pass rush is going to get after him. He's probably going to have to run, and 10.5 is a more than beatable number, and you can see that by his numbers right now. He's been right around that mark. So if you want to take it, I don't hate it. I think it's a pretty good spot. I'd say probably get that a little yellow light there as one that I don't think I'm all in on, but it's not a bad spot. You know, Sam Laporta over the receptions at 4.5, minus 130. It's always a play you like, especially when Detroit is at home. Both him and Jared Goff play much better at home. I mean, no surprise there. There's a correlation. One play I do really like here, and let me just see if I can, I'll just flip these a little bit so we can kind of better see these numbers. But I wanted to see this Will Levis play because Will Levis's rushing yards is very interesting. The first game, he went over this mark. He had 11 rushing yards, but ever since, he's been doing virtually nothing on the ground. And you see the juice towards the under now for Will Levis. It's weird because he's a guy who can run, and we do trust him to run because he has that athletic ability, but he just hasn't. The past 2 games, he hasn't run at all. And so if you're looking for an underplay that looks pretty solid, I think that Will Levis under rushing yards is a good play. You know, you see here Russell Wilson's under rushing yards. I would not be looking at that one. It's 24.5, but he's gone over 20, and I believe each of his last 4 games. So it's not necessarily a play I'm looking for right now. Against Minnesota, especially, a team that blitzes a lot, you don't want to necessarily be looking at a Russell Wilson under rushing play, because if they blitz a lot and they get pressure on the quarterback, he's going to scramble and probably run a little bit to gain yardage. And I think what we've seen over the past little bit is kind of more the throwback vintage Russell Wilson, a guy who's willing to make some of these plays and ultimately decide to run the ball instead of just throwing the ball away or staying in the pocket. But these are the plays I did want to highlight and talk about because I think they're all really, really good value. So let's do a quick recap on the plays for this weekend. Will Levis under rushing yards at 9.5. Christian Kirk over receiving yards at 58.5. Sam Howell over rushing yards at 12.5. Trey McBride over receiving yards at 55.5. Tyler Higbee under receiving yards at 28.5. And K. Dotton under receiving yards at 27.5. Thank you guys so much for watching and enjoy NFL football this weekend. As always, if you tail, give Prizepicks hell, and if we fail, do not bail. If you're a first-time depositor, make sure you use the promo code WAKEUP for a 100% deposit match up to $100. Good luck this weekend. I'm out. Peace.